So this is a portable GameCube. It works by using a Wii motherboard that's been trimmed down to its essential components, and since this does run on original hardware, GameCube games and Wii games run perfectly, with no emulation involved. Although if you did want to play games from a different console, there's a long list of emulators available for the Wii. This design comes from someone that goes by Wesk on the bitbuilt forums, and it's called the Ashida. It's a 3D printed case and uses custom PCB boards to help communicate with the controller and all of the other components involved in the build. I had pretty much no experience with soldering or doing anything like this before. Before this project, I purchased an Arduino starter kit and I learned some stuff, but not much really. Oh, I made this cat feeder out of garbage. I actually didn't trim this Wii myself. I purchased it already trimmed from Crazy Gadget on the bitbuilt forums. I knew he would do a really good job, and it was one less thing that I had to worry about. Next up was to start soldering. And right away there were definitely problems. Like while attempting to solder a chip to one of the boards, I kept bridging the pads, shorting the two together and eventually leading to me ripping out the ground pad on this board. Ended up ordering a new PCB set. Looking back, I maybe could have soldered a ground wire from a different location on the board, but the set ended up coming in handy later on. So the next problem I faced was soldering these super small pins to this board. This completely confused me. I was just barely able to solder the chips before. How was I possibly going to solder these when they're half the size? Though I had to try, and in my attempt, I bridged many of the pads together, and again leading to me ripping out some of the traces. Okay, maybe this project's going to be harder than I thought. I had an extra board from ordering a new set before, so I ordered a new connector, and with some advice from the people in the forums, I ordered some proper no-clean flux, and this worked right away. You can just drag the iron across the connector, and the flux helps the solder flow directly to the pins. The next thing I decided to start on was preparing the screen driver board. There's this inductor that needs to be removed for the low voltage mod on the board to work, so I used a heat station to heat up the inductor until it was hot enough where I could just pick it up. Although in the process I didn't realize that I heated up everything around it as well. So when I pushed the inductor off the board, I also pushed like 4 or 5 incredibly small components off the board. One flew into my room and I had no idea where it went. So at this point I'm starting to get pretty discouraged. I had just started. I knew the hardest parts were still ahead of me, and I've had to replace multiple things for this build already. It was beginning to cost more than I was comfortable with.
What's the matter? Lives flashing before your eyes? Pick it up. Pick it up.
But I bought a new board. And after preparing the new driver board, I started to assemble the build, adding in the screen, as well as the controller boards. And in the process of mounting the boards, I realized that some of the screw posts that were printed in this were just terrible. I ended up destroying this one, so I just glued in the board. So if any of these buttons break, I don't really know how I'm fixing that. Instead of these two buttons down here being start and Bluetooth sync, I wired them to be the two menu controls, this one being menu, this one being up. This allows you to run auto config for the screen, and I'm really glad I did it this way. The borders in some of the games just don't line up quite right, and I moved the start button up to the left C button, which you can do pretty easily by gouging out the trace on the board leading to the controller chip and wiring it directly to the start button pad. And so at this point I'm starting to make some pretty good progress. The backside of the portable has the fan installed, the heat sinks and all of the boards it needs, and much of the wiring is halfway done. Next up was connecting the voltage lines to the Wii. This was pretty straightforward. I did have to redo all of these lines because the Wii wouldn't sit flat on the heat sinks, but other than that, no real issues. One of the hardest parts of this build was soldering to the vias on the Wii. The vias are the small holes or openings that are drilled through the circuit board on the Wii. This allows electrical signals to pass through different layers on the board, and to solder here you need to scrape away the soldering mask covering the holes and get a good connection without creating any shorts between the surrounding vias. Although after trying, I completely gouged out the trace on this via here. I thought it ruined the board actually, But after consulting the council on the forums, once again they told me it was pretty far downstream and would most likely be fine. I could solder to the other via that carries the same signal. And actually after that, I didn't have many problems soldering. I think I made all the mistakes I needed to make. I was able to properly wire up the vias on the Wii. The VGA lines here look pretty ugly, but other than that, I was making pretty good progress. Although probably the hardest part of this build was soldering to the H and V-Sync pins on the Wii. These were the smallest pins I've had to work with yet, and I ended up shorting these together multiple times. It was annoying, but finally I was able to get a decent connection on both of these pins. So after all my troubles, and after almost everything was put together, it was time. I put a battery in, and nothing. This hurt because what do I even troubleshoot? Nothing happened. I really didn't know how to troubleshoot electronics. I was starting to panic, but I did see I was not getting any power. So I charged the batteries, still nothing. Did I break something? I had no idea, so I decided to redo the entire backside of the portable. Although in the process I realized something. I never soldered the power button. Oh my gosh. This was frustrating, but ultimately a good sign to me. It explained why not even the fan had turned on before. And so I put everything back together on the backside. It was ready to test again, and yes. I've never been so happy to see an error message before. So it was working. There were definitely more problems I didn't mention, like not realizing the Bluetooth sync button pulls the 3.3 volts instead of shorting the ground. That was obnoxious. The speakers weren't working, so I had to solder wire directly to them. And there was a short somewhere causing the device to shut off randomly, which I fixed by applying Captain tape to the Wii. But it worked. I was surprised to see just how well these games look on the IPS displays. Being as old as they are, but they really do look great. The recording doesn't do it justice. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. This was so fun to build, and I hope to make another in the future now that I sort of know what I'm doing. All credit, of course, goes to Wesk, and thank you to everyone on the forums who helped answer all my questions. I hope to upload more of my projects here to this channel, so if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe. See you.